So right away we have ace queen offsuit here in middle position versus under the gun. This is a spot in which you don't really want to flat call, even at NL25 where the rake's a little bit lower than at NL5 and NL10. I would still play 3-bet or fold, and so ace queen I think is a fantastic 3-bet bluffing hand. Your hand is slightly ahead of your opponent's range, but he's not going to be calling many worse hands, of course. The power of this hand is mainly that you have an ace and a queen in your hand, so you block a lot of your opponent's calling range, and you block a lot of his 4-bet range. So you can expect to see a lot of folds when you 3-bet with ace queen. So Jack 10 is pretty close. Your hand is somewhat playable, but also somewhat dominated. And the odds we're getting aren't very appealing because it was a 3x open raise by under the gun and then a call by the button. So since under the gun raise, his range is a bit stronger than, let's say, middle position or cutoff. And so button is going to flat a much tighter range than, let's say, versus the button, versus middle position or cutoff. So I think this is just a fold. Again, the rake is a major factor here. And I'm not looking to play too many of these dominated hands out of position. If my opponents made it a bit smaller, like more like 2.5x or even a min raise, then it would be much closer. Well, ace queen is definitely a good 3-bet if you flop like this. It's almost impossible for us to be behind. He's going to have pocket eights at a discounted frequency. Pocket queens mostly get 4-bet pre-flop, but I expect these games to be a bit tighter, so I do expect him to have some pocket queens. And then pocket aces should never be in his range. But of course, that doesn't mean they aren't, right? They definitely still could be. And then I expect him to have hands like ace king, ace jack suited, ace 10 suited, 10s, jacks, some suited connectors, some under pairs, and maybe an occasional random hand, of course. On this board, we can probably just bet for a small sizing at a very high frequency. Now, there's many different strategies, but for the sake of simplicity and effectiveness, I'll choose the small range bet here. So there's, of course, many different strategies to use, but it's better to use a strategy that's good but somewhat simple rather than a strategy that is a tiny bit better but 100 times more difficult to execute, right? So if I were approaching this spot with, let's say, an NL1K student, I might mix it up a little bit. But you'll see that the difference in EV is minimal. So it's not as if I'm teaching you a bad strategy for the sake of simplicity. Of course, you should always avoid that. You should always think about the game first. And then when you can simplify, you should. But if there's no way to do it, you shouldn't force it just so you don't have to think anymore. 9-7 suited is a bit loose under the gun. Even middle position, this is loose. Ace is not so much. And we get an 8-8-5 flop. This board is definitely better for the big blind. We're not going to raise many fives from under the gun. He's not going to defend too many of them, but a few more than we will open raise. And then when it comes to the 8, he's definitely got quite a large advantage. We're going to raise hands like 8-7 suited or 9-8 suited sometimes, ace-8 suited, pocket 8s, of course. But he's going to have pocket 8s. He's going to have all the other 8s I mentioned, but he's also going to have hands like perhaps 8-5, 8-6, 10-8, jack 8, queen 8, king 8. We could have king 8 as well. So he's going to have a major 8x advantage here. So you could still simplify this in bet range. However, the difference in EV is much greater than in the previous spot. So I don't mind if you do it. Again, if you're not so comfortable playing a mixed strategy in position, you could still simplify. At least the 5 is, not the most connected card. If the 5 were a 7, it'd be a bit worse. If there were a flush draw on board, it would be a bit worse because he just has more good hands on those different flops. So anyway, for the sake of the video, I should have bet range 1/3, but I actually decided not to. I decided to have a check back range, which is something that's the strategy I would use if I played against my regular opponents. And so if you're going to check behind, aces is a nice hand to check behind because your hand is good but not incredible, but it needs absolutely no protection, right? I mean, a 9 or a 4 are, I guess, are not the greatest cards because the straight gets there, but that's about it, right? Because there's no overcards that you have to be afraid of. Whereas a hand like pocket jacks is kind of similar to aces. It's just an overpair, except you're afraid of a queen, king, and ace, right? So that's quite a bit of protection that you need versus virtually no protection with aces. So if we're going to check behind an overpair, aces is the one to do it with. Now, you don't always want to check behind with aces. You still want to bet sometimes. But it's nice. It's a nice way of protecting your range. Let's say making sure that you don't get run over with check raises, making sure that one villain leads turn, you don't automatically fold, or you only check back in like ace king. And on this turn, of course, you're calling ace king. But let's say the turn is something like a jack, then you're always in a tough spot. You never really have hands to fight back with. And so against a very tough opponent, we should also be checking back trips sometimes. Of course, that happens at a lower frequency because, I mean, we have trips and we want to get a lot of value. But, you know, you can't just, again, you can't just check back only aces because if your opponent were to go like 2x pot, 2x pot, I mean, you're in deep trouble. And I understand that that type of play is not so common at NL25, whereas at higher stakes, it's very, very common. So, you know, protecting your range in that manner isn't quite as important as at higher stakes, but it still helps. And it's really cool when you, let's say, get led into and you can start raising turns and rivers, and your opponent thinks, hey, what the hell does this guy have? This is he doesn't represent anything. He would have bet any eight. He would have bet most overpairs. What is this guy representing? And then he'll make a bad call, and you show up with your sneaky trips. So it's a good way of being deceptive as well, which is something you don't really see much below NL500. Ace Queen offsuit, obviously an easy raise. We've got Vatilaver crushed and Trakan as well. And occasionally he's going to trap us. That's okay. Deja vu. So we raise ace queen, which I love, and we flop top two pair. So here, same thing. We want to have some kind of strong checks sometimes. So when our opponents bet, we don't always fold, or we don't always like side call with kings and then fold the turn. We want to be able to, you know, call down comfortably and prevent them from just stabbing. Ace queen is not the greatest hand to do it with. Your hand is obviously incredible. Realistically, we can't lose here. I guess Trakan could have sevens, but the button would have always isolated sevens versus somebody who could be a recreational player. So we have the best hand here 97% of the time, I would guess. Ace Queen is a good hand there for the bet because we almost can't lose. The problem is that our opponents are going to call us with a draw, a queen, or an ace. So when we have a queen and an ace in our hand, it's much more difficult to get called by many worse hands. With that said, there's still two aces in the deck and two queens, so I think we should go ahead and bet. If we had a hand like aces, I'd be a bit more willing to check. Because now there's only one ace left to call with, especially over multiple streets. I mean, a queen is likely not folding to a flop bet, but it is probably folding to a turn or river bet. And with aces, clear value bet on the river, and he called with queen jack, which is, it's loose, but it's okay. It's okay. I would say that at these stakes, that's probably not a winning call against the average regular. Meanwhile, we open jacks, which is standard, and I think we should always see bet the flop with jacks here. Our hand is extremely good. We have the best hand probably over 90% of the time again. But just like in the previous example with aces, jacks need a lot of protection because any 6, 7, 8, heart, queen, king, or ace really hurts us. A 9 is also not a fantastic card. A 5 and a 4 I'll take. So a very good hand which needs a lot of protection. So we want to pump in some money right now. And ace queen here, if we're ever going to trap, this is a nice hand to be trapping with. I mean, now there's only two queens left and one ace, so we don't mind seeing our opponent put in some bets. If one of them has an ace, they are likely going to bet for us. Of course, that's not a guarantee. So I don't really mind this. It's pretty nice to just let them see a free card and maybe catch a flush or a straight, or just believe that their queen is good. And the 3 river brings the flush. So it's definitely possible that both of them have a flush or either one of them has a flush. They could have checked back a random flush draw or something like Queen X plus hearts. So checking here would again not be unreasonable. You can't really expect them to call a big bet with a queen here, or maybe even a small bet they would fold against. So, but the problem is if you bet here, they're going to call with a flush unless it's a very good one. Whereas if you check, they will definitely bet. So this could be a nice hand to trap with, for sure. So I don't actually remember what I did, but I think trapping here is probably the best play. Which other hands could we consider value betting? We could have bet maybe hands like ace 10 on the flop sometimes and check the turn. We could also add in a smaller bet then. So I think a small bet makes sense or a check. Betting really, really large, just let's say putting cutoff all in doesn't really work because our blockers are just, I mean, they're too good, but at the same time too bad, right? Our hand is extremely good, but therefore, what the hell are they going to call us with? And Queen 10 is an open raise. King 4 is the board on which I would recommend just range betting. The king is obviously much better for you. The 4 doesn't really help anybody. The flush draw obviously does, and there's also not much else going on, right? There's no straight draw out there, only one overcard, so just a very dry board you can be aggressive on. And the ace is a good card for both of us. So villain is going to check call plenty of ace highs, so he will improve a bunch. But since we're betting our full range, we're also improving a bunch on the ace. The thing is, we will have hands like 8-7 of spades, let's say, that don't improve at all, but he's not calling those on the flop, right? So we're going to have, I mean, this card is actually maybe a little bit better for him because of that. So now, if let's say we were mixing it up and we are therefore not betting many ace highs, so then it would be even better for him, right? Because he's calling a lot of ace highs, but we're not betting many of them. At least now we've got all the strong ones. Where we're ahead, obviously, is hands like ace, king, and aces. So actually, it's about even. He's probably got more aces than we do. I put it like this: a bigger percentage of his continuing range is an ace, but we've obviously got the stronger ones. So if we bet here, I'd like to see a pretty big bet. I don't really mind this. We block ace 10 and ace queen pretty well. Obviously, you can't bluff every club combination and heart combination, as well as every gut shot, because then you're going to end up overdoing it. 5-6 suited, I mean, this is a very close open raise. I would say you can definitely just fold this in the right lineup, or in the wrong lineup, I should say. But I decided to open raise it this time. I do see somebody in the small blind who doesn't have a full stack, so we could play a few more hands with him because we might have an advantage over him. And as I hoped, I don't want to say predicted, but as I hoped, somebody would end up betting. That's a nice thing about checking here multi-way is that at least there's two people who can bet. The only issue is that, you know, they're going to have to bet multi-way, which again frees them up a little bit. So villain bets 11 here. I would just like to see myself shove all in. If he's got a flush, he's probably going to end up calling. If he has an ace, maybe he could fold, but I don't see it happening. So if he had, let's say, like 75 behind, then shoving is a bit much. So yeah, I think for 47-4 total, I think we can go all in. Snap fold, so that's probably a bluff, I guess. 10-5 suited. I have to be honest, I'm not quite sure about this one. I would normally always defend this. I've never folded that against 2.2x, but with the rake, I wouldn't be shocked if it's a fold. I think the call is correct, but I could be convinced otherwise. Either way, it's very close. You're not going to get rich by calling this hand. You're definitely not going to go broke by calling this hand. We are definitely not going to go broke on this flop because we should just be folding. Even if villain bets something like quarter pot, it's his money to win. And that's okay, guys. Sometimes you just got to give it up. You got absolutely nothing in a spot where villain just has a lot of good stuff. You just got to accept that you lose, right? Even guys like OTB Red Baron or Linus Love, incredible players, it's not like they win every hand. They play their hand a little bit better than their opponent would. And all those little edges add up to a large edge. But it's not as if they win every single hand.